Buckingham Palace has confirmed that President Trump will make his long-awaited state visit on the 3rd of June this year. The US President was promised a visit by Theresa May after he was elected in 2016, but no date was set. He travelled to the UK for a working visit in July last year, where he met the Queen at Windsor Castle. It's understood he'll go to Buckingham Palace before travelling to France as part of the commemorations for the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Joined by Guardian columnist and author Owen Jones and by Kate Andrews, Associate Director at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hello to you both. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with Owen, should we? Normally ladies first, but I want to go to Owen because, Owen, when he came last year, you were very keen that there would be demonstrations to try to make him less than comfortable, less than welcome. What about this time?
We're going to be out on the streets all over again. Look, this is only the third US president to be offered the honour, which is what it is, of a state visit. It was an honour which was offered to him as soon almost as he became president of the United States. Most presidents are not given this honour. It gives respectability and legitimacy from the US's closest ally to decide to do this. And the key thing of why we're marching, I mean, well, I think looking for reasons not to march is probably a more fruitful exercise. I mean, for example, at the moment, he's trying to veto attempts to support victims of rape in war, to stop rape being used as a weapon of war, on the basis that reproductive services may be offered to those victims, those survivors. When Donald Trump leaves the Paris Agreement on climate change as the biggest polluter in history, which is what the US is, that affects all of us. When he incites hatred against Muslims, that affects all of us. When he retweets Britain First, a British fascist organisation, as it whips up hatred against Muslims, that affects all of us. When he uses his bully platform to whip up hatred against trans people, and he's forced through a ban on them serving in the US military, that affects trans people in this country. So it's so important we join up the dots. It's not just about protesting about Donald Trump, the individual. It's not about him being vulgar or coarse. It's about standing in solidarity with Muslims, with trans people, with refugees and migrants. It's about what Donald Trump represents. It's Trumpism, if you like, that we're marching against. And at a time when, after almost a decade or over a decade since the crash, when the banks caused this disaster, when there's been an attempt to direct anger towards refugees and migrants and Muslims, we're saying we should direct that anger at the rich vested interests like Donald Trump, not our neighbours instead.
Kate, take the bones out of that.
Well, I hate to disappoint. I agree with a lot of what Owen said, especially on what Donald Trump has said about minority groups. If we take our personal opinions out of this and just look factually at what he has done, he has mocked disabled journalists, he has insulted and made derogatory comments about women's looks, he has branded large minority groups as horrific things I don't really want to repeat on air. Very recently, just a few weeks ago, he was mocking asylum seekers. And in this international world, actually, I mean, back at home where I'm from in America, here in the UK and on the broader global scene, we've had to deal with the repercussions of this, and we've had to learn how to operate in this world. And I think protesting Donald Trump, if you feel compelled to do so when he comes here, is the democratic, peaceful, and right thing to do for those who want to stand up against many of those comments that he's made.
But should he
we
be
must
invited?
separate the man.
Yeah, let me just ask you though, Kate, should he be invited, or are you saying
Yes.
he shouldn't be invited?
No, I think he should be invited. We must separate the man from the head of state, from the office that he represents. And one head of state is meeting with another head of state, and these aren't just two random countries. These are arguably some of the closest allies in the world and have been for decades. And one man does not get to destroy that. Donald Trump does not get to determine what the past or future relationship with the UK and America is going to look like. And actually, I think the state visit has arguably made it easier for politicians to protest Donald Trump if they choose to do. Having one head of state meet another means that elected representatives here in the UK, I think, have a bit of an easier ride if they don't want to invite Donald Trump to speak in Parliament. But let's not let this one person, protest him if you want, but let's not let him create any kind of negative sentiment between the UK and the US, especially as the UK is Brexiting from the European Union, especially as it wants to secure free trade deals around the world. It is thought that the US one is going to be one of the most important ones early on in that phase.
Can we separate the two, Owen? The man
this is not
and the office?
this is not an anti-American protest. This is a pro-American protest. At our last demonstration, thousands of Americans were marching alongside us because the majority of Americans didn't even vote for the guy. There's a proud tradition in the United States. I'm thinking of the civil rights movement, the LGBTQ movement, the women's movement, the workers' rights movement, which fought against the sort of hatred, bigotry and the pro-elite values that Donald Trump today so encapsulates. The best traditions of the United States should be embraced, should be cherished, which is about those who oppose war, who want to support and take action to defend our climate and to stop the disaster of climate change. And Americans are crying out every time we do these protests. They're saying, we are standing with you. We want you to protest. And the kind of, you know, the impact of so many people, diverse, multicultural people, Muslim, non-Muslim, women, men, people LGBTQ and straight, marching together in the closest ally of the United States has a big impact. And let's not forget, Jimmy Carter, did he get a state visit? No, he didn't. Ronald Reagan, no fan of Ronald Reagan. He didn't get a state visit either. Countless presidents did not get the honour of a state visit. No one's saying we should cut off ties with the United States, but we are saying that if Donald Trump uses the bully pulpit of the US presidency, the most powerful man on earth, to whip up hatred against Muslims, against LGBTQ people, against refugees, against migrants, against women with his track record of misogyny, then we will come out in great numbers to say that we oppose his anti-climate change policies, his pro-war policies, his anti-refugee policies, his pro-elite policies. And it's about, as I've said, Trumpism, because let's be honest, a lot of the things I'm talking about there, they're not just American phenomena. They're happening in this country as well. The election of Donald Trump emboldened every racist on the face of the earth. But we're saying we're fighting back. We're taking to the streets. We're showing that there is an alternative to scapegoating these minorities for injustices caused by the powerful.
So obviously it's not an anti-American protest. As I said, I think the right to protest is a fundamental one, and those who want to push back on many of the president's heinous and racist comments should do so. But I mean, if I may, a small suggestion would be to keep this as nonpartisan as possible. I think more people will go out and join if this is really about the racist and sexist comments that have come from the president. But when you start to combine that with attacks on the Paris Climate Accord decision, which actually many people who really would like to tackle climate change recognize as not a very good accord, and moves emissions from developed parts of the world to developing parts of the world, I would try to avoid that elitist rhetoric because it gets into partisan politics. And if this is really about supporting migrants, supporting minority groups, supporting women, and being anti what the president has said in those particular aspects, keep it as nonpartisan as possible. And I would also separate it from the relationship that the UK and the US must maintain to keep this world more prosperous and to keep it safer. The president does not get to decide what that future relationship is going to look like. I mean, there's an election in 2020. It may be Trump who gets reelected. We may have a new president of the United States. It would be a real shame if talks between the two head of states and talks between the president and the prime minister broke down, especially around securing a free trade deal for the future because of this one man. So we must separate the man from the office. If we are going to protest and speak out against Trump's comments, I think we should do so in an inclusive way, one that isn't about left or right, but as Owen says, about the liberal principles of democracy and those living in a free society who believe all people are created equal, as we say in the States, and don't think the president should be singling people out.
Well, look, last year, we managed to get hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of this capital and across the country on a weekday. It was on a Friday. It was a wonderful day. The biggest daytime protest for a very, very long time. And it wasn't just by saying we're against things. I think it's always important in a protest to say you're for something. And I make absolutely no apology to say that this demonstration will be saying we support action to tackle the existential threat of climate change, which Donald Trump and his administration are making so much worse. We make no apologies for the fact we will be marching against the scapegoating of migrants and refugees and Muslims for all the injustices caused by powerful vested interests. We will be marching for workers' rights. We will be marching for the rights of women, which are so endangered by a presidency, let's not forget, as I've said, which at the moment is trying to veto action to ban the use of or to tackle the use of rape in war. It's so important that we are there with an inspiring message, and I think the vast majority of people in this country don't just reject Donald Trump, they reject what he stands for, and we will be there united, determined, in the best tradition of both Britain and America, which is standing against oppression, exploitation, bigotry, all of the things which is encapsulated in the presidency of Donald Trump. And you can't separate, as I've said. It's Donald Trump who's been invited. As I've said, most US presidents do not get a state visit.
U.S. carbon emissions have declined more spectacularly in the U.S. last year than they did in the U.K. It's not to say that all of us can't do more, but I do think making this overtly political and actually trying to bring in a form of left, bigger state politics is a mistake when we're actually trying to reach out and tackle the issues that are facing minority groups in a purely racist, sexist way that can be, embraced and can be fought against by the left and the right. I mean, maybe this is a comment about protests more generally, but I think it's always such a disappointment that protests that are supposed to be particularly supporting immigrants and migrants and asylum seekers very, very often turn leftist and they become anti-capitalist and pro-protectionism, policies that actually in the U.S. specifically, which is a very successful capitalist country, have been of huge help to migrants and immigrants. There is obviously a place to campaign for those kinds of politics. We have debates about it all the time, another wonderful aspect of a free society. But if this is really about the president and Trumpism and his comments and the way that he degrades and abuses minority groups with his words and sometimes even with his actions, then that is what we should be focused on. And it's going to make it very difficult, say, for small L liberals, libertarians to come out and support when they feel like they have to be part of an anti-capitalist rant. Let's keep this about the president and his remarks, and let's separate the state from the president. Let's separate his office from the actual candidate that you're protesting, because in 18 months' time, it may not be the same person. Okay. You may have somebody, a Democrat, coming over representing the Oval Office, and surely you might like them to have a state visit.
Well, Kay, on that, I think it's really important just to show how we will.
Really quickly, because we're out of time. Thank you. Really quickly, Owen.
Just quickly, we will be joining up the dots with what's happening here. This country deports gay refugees. This country has massive Islamophobia. We would be hypocrites if we weren't just protesting about Trump, but about his values, which are in full play in this country as well, by a government and a system which demonises refugees, migrants, Muslims, which doesn't treat women properly, which doesn't treat workers properly. We will be protesting not just about what's happening in America, but the similar things happening in this country as well.
Good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you.